So what about actual problems with the algorithms? So how much damage could that really do? How much damage could bias do in an algorithm? That's the question, because maybe not much. We have to investigate this. So we can look for historical analogs. So this is a pun, because it's really sort of an analog algorithm that we're going to look at. And this is just a one slider here, and so I'll do lots of talking and just leave this up. But the Federal Housing Authority had an algorithm in the 1930s. And it was a real algorithm. It's actually not analog, it was digital. There was a rubric, and it's very much the kind of thing that ACT would be familiar with. You know, you have a rubric, somebody comes in, they want a loan, we want to figure out whether the FHA should insure this loan, it should be accepted. And so they have an algorithm where you will score both the property and the people, the borrower, and they have a rubric. And it turns out that a lot of what they had in this rubric was biased against, well, by proxy, mostly poor African Americans in urban areas. And a lot of it didn't seem like it would be biased. It really was, these were proxies for people living in inner cities. They didn't, you know, in the face of things, it wasn't racially biased. You know, you wanted, you know, to ensure houses that had a lot of open air, a lot of open space. And so if you had an apartment block in an inner city, that was not the kind of place that FHA wanted to insure. So there were some that were actually explicit, where mixing of races in a neighborhood was a bad thing. That actually counted against it, because there could be some sort of conflict. And so developers would actually go out and into the suburbs, and they would produce segregated neighborhoods. And in fact, you even got scored higher if you had barriers, physical barriers between neighborhoods. If it was very clear, it was difficult to get from one type of neighborhood to another. And so what were the implications of this? This was caught, by the way. I mean, it didn't last forever. Around 1948, I think they figured out that this was not constitutional, and it stopped. But unfortunately, by then, segregation had increased by 40% from 1910 to the late 1940s. And it continued to go after that. It didn't stop. And the reason was because people who were in the inner cities, they could no longer afford these very nice houses in the suburbs. And in fact, schools are more segregated now than they were, I mean, in the 1960s. Income inequality, racial income inequality is greater now than it was in the 1960s. These are things that are difficult to repair. And so the question, my motivation for studying this really is, how do we, with this sort of knowledge, what kind of foresight can we have for how we deploy these sorts of algorithms that may contain bias that we don't detect? How can we predict what might happen and try to keep it from happening? Because it's very difficult, even after it's been stopped, to go back and fix what we've done.